Friday, August the 13th, 2004. We are interviewing Miss Helen Alexander. Ms. Alexander was with the USO during World War II. And
USO Camp Shows.
USO Camp Shows during World War II, and she had some very interesting experiences while she was serving at the USO. We are at the Atlanta History Center. My name is Lillian Gantsutis. And Mrs. Alexander, if you would first say your name and tell us where you were born.
My name is Helen Alexander. I was born in New York City, and the subject is World War II. So I'd like to describe New York at that time a little bit. It was a very tense time for most of us. They told us there were U-boats off of Long Island, and so we had blackouts. And one night, I went outside, probably shouldn't have been out there, and it was absolutely eerie. Not a light. Just walked around, could hardly see, except the moon was out. And all of a sudden, there was one shade in somebody's apartment that was up, and it made you so angry because that one light could have, given away the whole story of New York.
So New York was in a blackout situation.
Oh yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Sirens and so on. And
where were you when war was declared?
I was at the Biltmore Hotel. The American Theater Wing, which is an organization that helps the theater and actors and directors and so on, they put on tea dances for servicemen. And the Navy, men from the Navy were invited to this tea dance. And the music was playing and everybody was dancing, we were having a great time. And all of a sudden, the admiral, I guess he was an admiral, he had a lot of scrambled eggs and stuff on his cap, came out and he said, "Everybody go back to your bases immediately." Everyone was in shock. Nobody knew what happened. And the women were left standing there. So we just went home. But that was when war was declared.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, what civilians did, my mother and I took Red Cross classes and rolling bandages and doing CPR and so on. And another thing the American Theater Wing did was called the Stage Door Canteen. You may have seen it. There's a movie by that name, which incidentally I was in. I'll tell you about that later. But it was like going into a subway. You go down the steps on 44th Street off of Broadway. And you go down the steps, and there's a tiny little stage where wonderful bands came to play and famous actors and singers appeared. And the theater wing had actresses there as hostesses to dance with the soldiers and sailors and so on. And we wore special uniforms, aprons and so on. And one of the situations, this was 1942 or 3, maybe it was 1944. And there were African American sailors and African American actresses, and sometimes African American sailors would dance with Caucasian actresses, and that would create some tension. And we were trained on how to deal with that. Like somebody would cut in and we would, talk to them and work it out. But it was another tense time there. But it was fun. The entertainment was fantastic, and the servicemen loved it.
A lot of servicemen in New York at the time?
Oh yeah, places filled with them.
Mm-hmm. The USO Camp Shows, how did you get involved in those?
Well, being an actress, you kind of keep abreast of what's going on, and I heard they were casting for this play, Junior Miss, which is a comedy, English comedy, very funny play. And agent called and said, go over to the Max Gordon Theater, they're casting. And it was really funny because if you knew the play, everyone was dressed like a character in the play, lined up outside the theater. And luckily I got the part of Lois in the play. It was an older teenage sister. And we had rehearsal for, I guess, a month. And they had an opening night performance at this Max Gordon Theater to invited guests. My parents were there, and of course they had a great time.
Mm-hmm. What was the story about? Is it Julia's Mist?
Junior Miss.
Junior Mist.
It's about two teenage sisters and all their boyfriends and the various things that come up.
And is it set during the 40s?
Yeah.
How long were you in Junior Mist?
About 10 months. We toured. There were 3 different routes that USO Camp Shows would take. The larger ones went, I'm not sure if I had the colors right, but it's red, white, and blue circuit. And I think we were on the red circuit, which was the largest. So we played all the large camps from New York to California and south and north.
Mm-hmm. What did you experience as you traveled? Were you traveling coast to coast?
Yeah.
What sort of things did
you?
What sort of things did you experience in the towns?
Oh, it was fun. We went to, we explored the small towns. We stopped in Paris, Texas once. It was a little tiny town, maybe bigger now. And I wanted to buy a dress with a Paris label. Anyway.
Did you find a dress?
I did. We opened in Alexandria, Virginia. And that was a town that had 4 different military bases, so the place was just teeming with servicemen. And there was an advance man that would go ahead to make arrangements for where we would stay. And the first place we stayed in this huge house, and 5 actresses stayed in one room, huge room. And I woke up the first morning, about 4 in the morning, I was freezing. So I went over there and I turned on the heater and went back to bed. And about an hour later, the other girls woke up and they started coughing. What's going on? I turned on the gas by accident. You know, in New York we have radiators. I didn't know about gas heaters, so they fixed it, so everything was fine. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was really amusing, there were child actors in this play, and they had got their homework from professional children's school. And they, of course, had to do it every day. And this one kid took a liking to me, and he would come into my room and do his homework. And he'd show me his little black book, and he had lists of all the military equipment we'd seen on all the bases. Planes, tanks, guns, you know it, name it. He had it written down in his book. And one day he was in my room, and the military police came in and said, "Son, give us that black book now." Why? I mean, this could have, they said, if this had fallen into the hands of the enemy, you've listed everything at all the bases you've been at.
How old was this boy?
He was about 12.
Oh my.
Yeah, he didn't know. He was this kid collecting things, so anyway.
Just thought he'd learn as he went.
One other thing happened. In Camp Pendleton in California, the soldiers wanted to be nice and entertain us, so they took us for a tank ride. We climbed in this tank, and the stage manager was very fat. He couldn't fit into the turret, so he couldn't ride with us. But anyway, we got a big laugh out of that.
Mm-hmm. How were you received by the troops at the different camps?
That's a good question. I was told that if the acting is good and you're believable, if they've never seen a play before, they would clap. They would be excited. If they could tell if you were faking. So we must have been good because they loved us. Anyway. Once we were in an amphitheater in California again. I don't know if it was Pendleton, one of those camps. And I felt so sorry. The soldiers were sitting out in the rain in this outdoor amphitheater, and we were on the stage, and they still loved it.
And the stage was covered?
Yeah, the stage was covered.
But the audience wasn't?
No.
That's wonderful. When you went to the camps, how long were you at a camp to do a show? Was it just one night? Were you there for
1 to 3 days.
1 to 3 days?
And we would sleep usually in barracks. Mm-hmm. And travel by bus. I felt sorry for some of the older people there because it was sort of a grueling experience traveling that way, but
The buses, how many buses were there to move a show?
one.
One bus.
One for the actors. I don't know how they got the scenery and all that, and I must have been another bus, another truck probably. We didn't see that.
How many actors were there?
I'll show you this picture.
Actually, can you show it to the side of your face over here, and I'll move for just a little bit. Is that everybody on stage?
2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 15.
And that you in
There
the
I am.
middle? Uh-huh. And tell me about your character. You said her name was Lois?
Yes. She's a know-it-all teenager who's pestered by her younger sister, and the sister's friend is called Fluffy Adams, and they're up to all kinds of mischief. This is my mother and father, and that's the nurse, or maid rather. That's one of the boyfriends over here, all the rest of the suitors.
That's wonderful. All right. If you stayed in the barracks, did you ever stay in hotels, or was it always barracks? Or
Once in a while in hotels,
Were
small
there-
hotels.
were there any hotels or any other memories while you were on the road?
I remember being on the stage, and a dog wanders across the stage, so you had to ad-lib about that. Never knew what was going to happen.
So if you weren't performing, what were you doing?
During the day, we'd sleep, I guess, till about 10 or 11, because the show went on late. We'd explore the towns. It was fun.
Was there a favorite town other than Paris where you went shopping for a Paris dress?
I don't remember, it so long ago.
And you said you were on the road for 10 months, was that right?
That's right.
Did you come back to New York after
Came
that?
back to New York.
And when, so you're back in New York, and when is this?
That's 44.
44?
I'd heard they were casting for, Mosshart was going to do a show called Winged Victory. And this was a show, a play with music, where 300 men from soldiers were drafted into this show, men who had been in the entertainment industry, where they were in special services. So they, all the names you could think of were in there, and it was a most wonderful experience. Anyway, again, agents had called and said, Helen, go over and read. So I went over, and Mosshart's sitting on a stage with this green light that you've seen in the movies at the table. And he's saying, thank you, ladies. He's dismissing everybody, all the actresses that were there. And I went up to him, I said, Mr. Hart, I came to read for you. Imagine what nerve I had. He said, young lady, you were late. I was so disappointed. He said, tell your agent to tell you to come for callbacks. We're reading for understudy. So I went home and I thought, that man's not going to know me from Adam's house cat, so I've got to do something to make him remember me. So every night I'd sit down and write a little note, and they went, or sent him little gifts like a pencil or a handkerchief or something, teenage stuff. And when I get there, a month later, the agent said, go over there and be on time this time. Mosshart's sitting there, and all the actresses are around him. He's sitting at his table with a green light. He said, who is Helen Eastman? That was my stage name. You want this part so badly, get up and read. So I did, and that was the beginning of a 2-year job. Isn't that wonderful? So chutzpah pays off.
You mentioned that there were lots of well-known actors.
Right.
Do you remember any of those that were in
Right, I do know. Leonard DePaul was one, and there's a story about that, and I'll come back to that. Mario Lanza, who was the operatic star, Eugene Conley, David Rose and his orchestra, Barry Nelson, Martin Ritt, Lee J. Cobb, who used to open on Broadway in, what was that play? About death of a salesman. And Edmund O'Brien, and so on, and my Barry Nelson. My roommate was Olive Deering, and I'm jumping ahead. On tour, we opened in New York and were there for about 10 months. Well, I'll jump around. on tour we would stay at very expensive hotels, and we couldn't afford to have room service every day, so we would, the first day we were there, we'd order room service, and we'd keep all the dishes, and then we'd go out to grocery stores and buy expensive food and put the food outside the window because it was very cold, like in Chicago, places like that. And the last day we'd call room service and they'd come and dishes. One other thing, laundry. With the first show, we didn't have a lot of time to do laundry, so some of these places had, motels had ceiling fans. So I thought, centrifugal force. So I'd hang my underwear on hangers and hang them on the fan and turn the fan on and they would dry.
Did it work?
It worked. It was a little weird when a bellboy came into the room, flying underwear.
Oh, my.
Where was I?
Well, you were on the road, but do you want to go back to opening on Broadway?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
All right. We opened actually in Boston, and Ross Hart changed the play. They kept rewriting. And I was an understudy, but I was in all the group scenes. And later on, I ended up playing the lead and playing, a small part regularly. So we got good reviews in Boston, and we moved on to New York. It was really exciting.
How long did the play run?
It ran for a year in New York, maybe 10 months to a year, and then we went on tour. And I remember a New Year's Eve celebration at the Astor Hotel.
What year would this be? 44?
44.
Okay.
44 or 45, I think it's 44. At the roof of the Astor Hotel that's no longer there. And who comes out with diapers on but Mario Lanza? He's a huge guy, as the New Year's baby. So, let's see, where were we? On tour, Leonard DePaul was a very talented African-American man who is head of the choral group, very, very well known in his field now. In fact, he's head of Lincoln Centers now. And we would go out to dinner, a whole group with Leonard. We'd go to restaurants and they would say, sorry, no room. We knew there was room. We'd say, we don't want to come here anyway, and march out. But that was,
Segregation at the time.
That happened all over the country. In fact, at the end of the run, the Air Force canceled the show in Washington. They couldn't face touring this show, at least that's my view of it, in the South, because they would have to deal with housing for Leonard.
It's come a long way, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. A ways to go, we've come a long way.
So how did you like performing in Winged Victory?
I loved it. Very exciting. We traveled on, when we went on tour, we traveled on troop trains. And there was a general, somebody high up there was in charge of the troops in the show. There's the theater and then the GI business. And he could not stand the idea that women were on this train. He wanted it all to be very GI. In fact, there was 6 actresses, and the rest of the women were wives of the husbands who were in the show. He did not allow us to talk to the men as we walked through the cars to the dining car. And when they walked out, when they went out on the siding, railroad siding to exercise, march up and down, we were not allowed to get out. So he did, all kinds of weird stuff.
Different military protocol for the
Exactly.
time, it sounds like.
I think he was different. Anyway. Okay. One thing I forgot about the other show.
About Junior Miss?
Junior Miss. We were out west. I don't know Iowa, I don't know what state it was. But I'll never forget this. There were these German prisoners there. And after the show, they ran after the bus and clawed at it. I felt so sorry for them. I was also scared to death. But anyway.
There were, so the camp that you were performing the show had some German prisoners
That's
there.
right.
And had the German prisoners been brought to see the show?
Yes.
And so as you all left, then they just ran after her.
Mhm.
That would be scary.
The bus took off.
Mhm. Were you in any danger, or was it
No,
just
I
a
don't
scary?
think so. Just
That's scary. Mm-hmm.
one thing we did with Wing Victory, this wonderful director named Martin Ritt, he's done a lot of movies, he's no longer living, but he had a workshop for actors where you get really stale if you're away from this New York and not working. And we would do scenes and the actors would critique us, and it was great. We would critique everybody. Anyway, we would do hospital shows. There was a little unit that was formed, a bunch of units, and one of them was ours. And Red Buttons, Jerry Adler, who was the harmonica player, his brother was Luther Adler, and me, we did a show called Flugel Street.
Flugel
Street. It's an old
Is it vaudeville?
vaudeville show. That's right.
Oh.
And they thought it'd be very funny if they took this uptight Park Avenue girl and had her do bumps and grinds, because basically that's what this thing was. It went something like this. I'd come across the stage and I'd say, "I've lost my husband." Once, and then let me go. "I've lost my husband." And I'd do 3 bumps and grinds, and the whoever the policeman was standing there on the stage would say, "Lady," now I don't know where he is. This went on 3 times. The last one would say, "Lady, you didn't lose your husband. You bumped him off." Ah, ha, ha, ha. And this was an old vaudeville
Old
thing.
vaudeville.
Yeah, right. So, anyway.
This group, did you ever, with Red Buttons, did you all ever perform anywhere, or was this just for other?
No, we did.
You did? Where would you do
We
that?
performed in hospitals, and we performed
Big
all
hospitals in New York?
all
Or
over
all
where
over?
we were,
Oh.
military hospitals, and also for the troops. And what else?
Well, Winged Victory, did that continue until the war was over? Which ended first, the war or the show?
Well, the show ended, and by the way, the proceeds from the show was put on by the Army Air Force Society, would go to the widows of the soldiers that were killed. So in closing the show, because they couldn't deal with Leonard DePauw's, African Americanism, they did themselves out of a lot of money. It's sad.
That's a shame.
So,
When the show closed, did you go back to New York?
yes.
What did you do in New York then?
I was in summer stock for 5 or 6 years, and then I did radio and a few films, and one thing happened while I was in California. I forgot to tell you. I left. I'm jumping around a lot.
That's all right. Is this California with Junior Miss?
I'm a junior miss.
All right.
I left in Los Angeles. I stayed there to do a part in the movie Wing Victory. I'm in the movie Stage Door Canteen. And
That's right. You mentioned that earlier.
and while I was on the set, I had a screen test at another studio, and you couldn't drive out there because there's no gas, and I didn't have a car, so I would hitchhike. And I had a system. If there was a man coming along, I'd pretend I was fixing my hair. If it was a woman, I'd hitchhike. And anyway, who comes along but Katharine Hepburn? Really? She had a driver, and she stopped, and she said, "Would you like a ride?" And I said, "Yes, I would." So I got in, and we had a nice talk, and she dropped me at 20th Century. And I still remember that.
That's amazing.
Charming one.
That's something. I'm sorry, do you have anything else
I
that
think that's about it.
Let me just ask you, when you were participating in the shows and the war is going on and you're in these military camps, did you realize how sort of the epic time that this was? That it was I mean, did you have, were you proud of what you were doing? Did you feel that you were part of this larger emotion that was going on during the war?
In those days, everybody wanted to help, and we all did in many different ways. That was one thing, except, you know, I'm an actress and I love to act, and it was a job. But like in New York, my friends and I got together and we did a newspaper to send to our friends who were overseas to keep them posted on what was going on. And little things like that. So you just did whatever you could. The general feeling all over was, we've got to all get behind this.
The newspaper that you did, how many copies of that? I mean, how many people were you sending it
No,
to?
not that many, maybe 50.
Still pretty many.
Yeah.
That's pretty good circulation.
Mimeograph in those days. It was Xerox.
You are in Atlanta now.
Yeah,
How did you get to Atlanta from New York?
good question. My mother's from Atlanta, so I came down here on a business trip with her, and I met my first husband, Arthur Harris.
What was your mother's name?
Josephine Lowenstein.
And then, so you met your first husband here.
Her husband my mother had, his family had this Norris Candy Company. That's before your time. Anyway, so I grew up with a sweet tooth. And I met him, and my aunt introduced me to every single man in town. And he said, Cecil loves to tell this story. He said, I want you to marry me now. I said, I just met you. And he said, well, so in a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks later, we went to Florida and got married with our families there.
That's nice.
And got 4 great kids.
When did you, so how old were you, or what year was it when you came?
25. That was 1947.
47. And so you've been in Atlanta ever since?
And Atlanta was really, I have a story about that that has to do with the military. Arthur had employed this African-American gentleman, James Williams, to work for him. And he had a daughter who was aphasic, you know, had to relearn how to speak and hear. And in those days, there was no place this child could go to get training because the speech school was segregated. So I went to a friend of mine, Phoebe Franklin. I said, let's do something about this. So we got some friends of ours to give money, and we found a wonderful lady, Irene Asbury, who was willing to go be sent to Washington University in St. Louis to become a teacher of the deaf, and that's a 2-year program. We also trained speech teachers. To make a long story very short, Spelman and Atlanta University alternately gave us a little house on each of their campuses, each alternate years. And we had this school there that we trained maybe up to, I don't know, 30 people a year, and or more. And it got to be too large for us. And the Junior League did come over and help us with their doctors. So we went to the public schools, and they said, okay, we'll take it over, and it'll be the first special education program in the city of Atlanta. So it was, and it gave. And it was really a wonderful achievement.
You should be proud of that.
We
That's
were
wonderful.
thrilled about that. And they, of course, they gave jobs to all these teachers all throughout the state. There are many jobs that are probably still not filled. That was a training that you couldn't get here because they didn't offer it. And the Board of Regents gave us extra money to send a teacher away to St. Louis.
Is there anything else about that time in Atlanta, 50s, 60s, that you remember?
I remember it well.
Have some Atlanta stories.
Again, it was segregated, and you know, in New York, you work with actors, all pink, green, blue, black, and I was used to that. I come down here, and the drinking fountains are, you know, colored and white, and people were really frightened, I think, of going against the temper of the times. And until it became the law of the land, they were scared of me in a way, because I'd speak my mind. But anyway, it was interesting to see how it evolved. I think what we did was wonderful because it was a process where we took time and to make changes. We didn't, deal with some other cities too.
Well, I'm glad you stayed in Atlanta.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you can think of that's you'd like to include in your story?
My brother, who's just died,
And what's his name?
Alexander Eisemann. He was on a B-24, a bombardier in Europe. I don't think what else to share with you.
Earlier you mentioned Cecil likes to tell the story. Is that Cecil Alexander,
Yes,
who is your husband?
right.
How did you all meet?
Well, Cecil's wife, Hermie, and I were good friends, and we were neighbors. And they were in a dreadful crash where she was killed and he was injured. And 2 years after that, he and I got married. And it's been wonderful because our children knew each other, went to school together, some of them.
You said you have 4 children.
I have 4 and he has 3, and when we get together, there are 25 of us, 26 of us.
That's wonderful.
It
That's wonderful.
really is a blessing. I'm lucky.
Is there anything else that you want to add?
Well, I'm still acting in commercials.
Tell us about your latest commercial.
My latest one on this elderly lady, typecasting, and with a walker walking across the street, and I had a stunt driver driving in a car, crashing, stopping just short of me, and I got so angry at him, I raised my fist and I take my walker. The director said, "Now Helen, do whatever you want to do." So I shook the walker at her. And the one before that was the one that's best known. It was for the Georgia Lottery, where I was in a bank, teller in a bank, very formal, hair in a bun and so on, corporate type. And this young, attractive man comes to the teller window with a check for $20 million, and I'm just absolutely floored. I said, "Excuse me a minute." So I leave, and I come back with my hair down, long eyelashes, pearls, long earrings.
And I remember a black sequin dress, wasn't it?
And I said, "My name is Edna, but my friends call me Sparkles, and I have a hot tub." And he just went, "Ah."
It's a wonderful commercial. It is wonderful.
So being married to Cecil's very exciting. He's always got these wonderful projects. He's designing the NASA designed a memorial for Ida Allen.
I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
They haven't decided on it yet, but that's still a possibility, among other things.
All right. Anything else?
I think that's it. I've really enjoyed it, Lillian.
Well,
Thank you so much.
well, I want to thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you too this afternoon. Thank you.